Hello, and welcome to IGI's webcast, Engaging with Project Sponsors, Your Pathway to Project Success. In today's webcast, Kurt Bittner will share with attendees how to work with project sponsors for optimal results. I am the moderator for today's session. I have a few general housekeeping notes to mention before we begin. All attendees will be on mute for the duration of this webcast. However, if you have a question during the presentation, you can use the question function in the GoToMeeting control panel, and you can submit those at any time during the presentation, and we will attempt to answer them all at the end of the presentation. So we will not answer them during the presentation, but at the end of Kurt's presentation. I'd like to introduce Ivor Jacobson International before we begin. IJI is a global IT services organization helping software organizations improve their way of working to deliver successful software projects. The ultimate goal for every development organization is to produce good software quickly and at low cost. At IJI, our focus and expertise is to resolve issues in the areas of bridging the gap between business and IT, defining requirements and ensuring that solutions meet the needs of business, meeting project budget and deadlines, and getting teams to work effectively. I'd also like to introduce Kurt. Kurt is Chief Technology Officer of IJI. He has worked in the software industry for more than 25 years in a variety of roles, including developer, team leader, architect, project manager, and business leader. He was a key contributor to the early development of the Rational Unified Process, as well as more recently IBM's JAS project. His experience includes significant work in banking and finance, relational database system design and architecting, and consulting and mentoring a wide variety of clients on software development projects. He is co-author of Use Case Modeling, Managing Iterative Software Development Projects, and the Economics of Iterative Software Development. I'll now pass the presentation over to Kurt, who can begin.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. And thank you, everyone, for attending. This topic I chose when we were thinking about the webinar series because I find that many teams, while they might have control over their own project team and the people related to the project team, they struggle sometimes with how to deal with the project sponsors. Either the project sponsor is regarded as someone who is perhaps a little bit intimidating to interact with, and they're afraid to give visibility to the project sponsor on what's going on, or they don't have much visibility at all, and they're sort of filtered by multiple layers in the organization. So I thought this would be an interesting topic to share with you some ideas and thoughts about how to engage and how to use them appropriately to your own advantage. So we're going to talk about first the importance of engaging with project sponsors, and then switch to a little bit of looking at what project sponsors can do for you or what they can do to you if you don't manage them effectively. Then we'll talk about what project sponsors typically need to know, and then when to engage with project sponsors across the life cycle, ways to communicate progress, risks, and issues, and then appropriate ways to ask for assistance and when you might want to get them involved and when you don't want to have them involved. So next slide, please. So probably the most important thing about project sponsors is that they control the money, and they often are the ones who are dictating how much money you can spend on the project and what the timing of the project is, in other words, what the delivery date is. So this is usually set well in advance of when the project starts, typically before anybody really knows what the real requirements are or even what the needs are. So the project sponsor has something in mind, typically when they request the funding or approve the funding. And part of what you have to do is figure out what's driving that and what's their motivation for the project. Typically then these project sponsors are significant stakeholders of the project, either directly or indirectly. Oftentimes they work through other people, the business representatives on the project. And they typically have a strong influence on the desired outcomes, or the needs for the project. One of the problems with project sponsors is that they tend to have very short attention spans, and so if they're getting information filtered through other people, then they often have only a partial view of what's really happening on the project. And if that view that they're getting is somewhat negative, then they can very easily lose faith that the project is headed in the right direction. So if that happens, especially if your project spans multiple years, your funding can be at risk. So this is another reason why you want to make sure that the project sponsor is happy and thinks the project is going well, because if they don't approve the funding for the next year, you could end up with significant cuts to your project or perhaps cancellation entirely. So the other thing, and we'll talk more about this toward the end of the presentation, is that the project sponsor, if used effectively, can help you clear obstacles to success. So they can get you more resources, they can get you more budget, they can work with other people on the project, other stakeholders in the organization to remove roadblocks. They can get people's schedules cleared, so that they have a tremendous amount of influence over the people who indirectly work with the project team. And so if they're on your side and understand what you're trying to achieve and believe in what you're trying to achieve, then they can really help you there. So the important thing, we'll talk more about this in the next 2 slides, is that you want to manage them and not have them managing you. So they very easily, if your expectations are not set correctly and you don't interact with them in a positive way that advances your ends, then they can be directing you in ways that you don't want to happen. So next slide, please. So what project sponsors can do for you is, well, as I talked, they can improve the funding. Typically, a project sponsor has control over a significant chunk of a budget. They are oftentimes, when they're funding a project, they're not doing other things. And so part of the tension that comes with working with the project sponsor is that they have other things that they need to achieve in the organization. They've probably cut back on those things in order to fund the project, and so there's already an immediate effect and a negative effect that the project has on the project sponsor's organization. Project sponsors can make decisions about project scope, and so as they not only are sources of desired outcomes and needs, but they often are important tiebreakers, or they can be enlisted to make decisions about whether a particular piece of functionality should be in or out. And if your business representatives are unsure about functionality, sometimes you want to push it back up to the project sponsor and get their buy-in. Clearing roadblocks, as I mentioned, that they have the ability to have sort of a powerful influence on the organization. So if there's another part of the organization, perhaps it's the part that's getting your development servers or your quality assurance servers or your environment set up, and things are taking a bit too long, they can push things along a little bit, they can pull some strings, and they have influence outside of their own direct area of influence. The ensuring commitment from business representatives ends up being critical, because oftentimes those people have conflicting priorities, and they need somebody to either clear their schedule or give them authority to not do certain things, or perhaps shift work onto other people. So ensuring that commitment ends up being an important thing that the sponsor can do. The insight into business goals and desired outcomes is important, because often they're the ones, and sometimes the only one, who can actually tell you why the project's being done and what the real driver behind the project is. So the representative on the project may have perhaps a low-level, day-to-day operational perspective on why the project's needed, but you often need to have that bigger picture, and the sponsor can provide that. And occasionally they can also provide valuable feedback. So they may not be direct users of the system, but perhaps they understand enough to know what things are important. So all in all, project sponsor can be fairly, very influential, and if used the right way, they can certainly have a positive impact. Next slide, please. So the problem with project sponsors, and why many project teams are afraid to engage with them, is that the project sponsor is a bit of a wild card in the sense. They have their own agenda, they are busy, they form decisions or form impressions very quickly, and they can be very unpredictable. If you're not used to managing at that level, then they're definitely free thinkers. So if they come in and they don't see things going in the way that they think they should be going, they can disrupt the project priorities, and that may be a good thing, or it may be a bad thing. And typically, if you're managing the project effectively yourself, then it's a bad thing because you have your own idea what the priorities should be, and you don't want other people coming in and redirecting that. They can also misdirect project team efforts, so they could pull the business representatives off and have them go work on another project. They could, in a sense, by changing project priorities, they could disrupt other things on the project team itself. So you want to make sure that they are what their interests or their perspectives are aligned with yours in order to make sure that doesn't happen. One of the things that happens sometimes is that if you don't communicate carefully with the project sponsor, you can spend an excessive amount of time cleaning up after poor communication. So you need to think very carefully about what you say to them, how you say it, when you say it, and make sure that the interactions are positive. And this includes informal communications that might just be a hallway conversation that someone has. And so if you don't think about how you want to present things outside the project team, somebody may run into somebody in the hallway or in the elevator, ask what seems to be an innocent question. Somebody makes a comment about, oh, we're having a lot of difficulties with testing that particular day, and then all of a sudden the project sponsor has this impression that you've got a quality problem or some other problem, when in fact it's not. It was just sort of a comment on how things were going that day. One of the problems too with project sponsors, especially on an iterative project, is that they can have a tendency to accelerate the delivery schedule. So if they see a prototype or see an early results of an early iteration that they like, it may look very good, but there may not be sort of real processing, sort of the real software running behind it all the time. They can interpret that, oh, this looks good, let's go ahead and roll this out. Or they might see a partial functionality and say, well, we have people who could use that immediately. So you need to be able to intercept that effectively and make sure that they don't, as the expression goes, jump the gun and get out ahead of where the project team really is in terms of its ability to deliver. So altogether, these things, if the project sponsor has a negative attitude, if somehow your communication ends up being poor and they start to doubt the ability of the project team, then that can demoralize the project team itself. So all in all, a lot of powerful benefits to working with the project sponsor and engaging with them, but a lot of negatives potentially if you don't handle it in the right way. Next slide, please. So typically what project sponsors need to know, and I'm drawing also from my own experience in this area, is that you want to know what is going to be delivered and how it relates to the business value. So somehow handing them a requirements document that's stated at a relatively low level doesn't do that. You need to be able to go back to the outcomes that the business wants to achieve and how key things that the project's going to deliver are going to help deliver on those outcomes. So you need to craft the message to the project sponsors at the right level and state the benefits in business terms, not in technology terms, and not even in the terms that the users might describe it. So the other thing that project sponsors always want to know is, when is it going to be delivered? And the reason for this is perhaps obvious, but I'll state it anyway, is that they're running a business. They have things that are happening in that business that are dependent upon this new solution or updated solution that you're going to be delivering. And there's a lot of coordination that has to go on. And so that when is very important. If things slip by a month or by a quarter or even longer, then it's very disruptive. They're not going to get the business benefits when they want them, and they have to plan to run the business differently. So there is an important reason why they keep asking about dates, and it's not just because they want to know if things are on track, but they do, but it's because there's a lot of other impacts as well. So finally, they also need to know how much it's going to cost. And again, the reason for this is that they're running a business. They've got budgeting that they need to do, and if they have to spend more, they're going to have to pull funds away from something else. So there's no unlimited, on the business side, there's no unlimited supply of money that they can keep coming up with without other kinds of impacts. So if the project's off track, they want to know what's being done to get it back on track, and what you're doing, when they'll know that it's back on track, and how they'll know it's back on track. So what I found is that more information than that is not helpful. So it's unlike perhaps some lower level stakeholders, users of the solution, getting into the details of how something works, these people tend to be very busy. So they need to be, you need to net it out down into very, very concise messages and very clearly oriented toward these sort of things, and not get too far into the details of how the project's going, what's happening in the project, what your problems are. And we'll talk more about sort of how to ask for their help later. But it needs to be very crisp because they, again, think about it, they're typically running a business or they're running some significant chunk of the business, and their time's short, and if they get into too much detail, they're going to lose track of what it is that you're trying to communicate. Next slide. So there's a number of touch points at which times you need to engage with these sponsors. So early in the project, and I'll phrase it in terms of the Unified Process Lifecycle, in the inception phase, you need to confirm what's going to be delivered and how it will deliver business value. So, this is really the whole purpose of the Unified Process Inception phase, is to make sure that you understand what needs to be delivered, understand what desired outcomes the business needs to achieve, and then understand how the solution is going to deliver on those, and that it can actually deliver on those within the time allotted and the budget committed to the project. So and also it's, in addition to that, it's important to set up expectations on when you will be coming back to the project sponsors with additional information on how the project is going. So this leads to giving them at least some understanding of how you're going to be working, that you're going to be, if you're going to be working iteratively, when you're going to be, when the iterations are going to end, and when they can expect to see new information about how the project is going. If you're working on a classic or a waterfall style project, and these communication points are typically certainly aligned with the phase endings and often aligned with some sort of monthly reporting cycle. So I'll continue looking at this from an iterative perspective because that's my favorite way of working. So at the end of an iteration, you want to provide updates on progress, risk, and quality, and I'll talk later on in the presentation about those measures and how they're aligned. And then when issues arise, you need to enlist their help to clear the various roadblocks. And we'll talk about that in a moment too. Next slide. So communicating progress, the way that I like to communicate progress is to not base it on schedule as you would on a classic or waterfall style project, but to base it on a progress curve that's based on the percent of successfully implemented and tested in scope product backlog items scaled by some complexity. So you see a simplified chart on the right. The dashed line represents the expected progress on the curve, expected progress on the project. And the curve represents, it starts off slowly as you deal with difficult issues, and then ramps up, gets relatively steep, and then toward the end of the project it slows down as you're taking care of the final little bits and errors and defects and things like that. So the progress curve then, if it's tracking along with the dashed line approximately, then things are good. If it starts to go slower, as this curve is starting to go, then you potentially have a problem, and so the sponsors would want to know what you're doing to correct that problem. Second thing to look at is an estimate to complete based on the projected velocity of the team, and so this is basically an agile burn down chart, and you'd like to see where you're going to end up based on actual productivity measures. And this is really just almost a flip or mirror image of the cumulative progress curve. And by looking at this, we can then see, well, when is the date that we projected originally, or maybe that the project sponsor dictated to us, is that actually going to be hit? And so you've got some data on that. So these two pieces of information tend to be very critical. They're very interested in this. Next slide, please. So the other curve that I like to look at, and I think is important, but you have to train the project sponsors to look at this and understand what you're telling them, is to look at the overall risk magnitude, the cumulative risk for the project. And so this is the probability of each risk times the impact of the risk, and those probabilities and impacts are scaled from 1 to 10. And you sum those, sum all of the risk magnitudes for all the risks, and plot them. And so typically the risks will start off, they'll climb a bit as you learn more in the inception phase and into the elaboration phase. And then if your mitigation strategies are working effectively, the cumulative risk will drop. So the reason why this is important for the project sponsor is to give them a sense that in addition to having good progress on the project that we looked at on the prior slide, that you're dealing with issues that would later on derail the project, and therefore your estimates and the progress is getting more, you're more confident of your progress over time. So this also gives you some visibility into problem areas that might be coming up. So issues are risks that have become reality, and of course issues might need the involvement of the project sponsor to help clear those out. So it's important for them to know about that. Next slide, please. So asking for assistance, a couple of things that I'll say here that sound contradictory, and so I'll explain them. So first of all, never be afraid to ask for help if you really need it. And sometimes only the project sponsor can really resolve some of the issues that you have. The important thing, though, is to make sure that the project sponsor can actually help. In other words, that the thing you're asking them to do is within the sphere of their influence, if not their authority. So, asking them to solve a technical problem obviously isn't going to be very effective because they are not capable of solving that. But asking them to solve an organizational problem, to get more resources or to get the cooperation of some other group, is something that they can often at least have influence over, if not direct authority. But the thing you have to do is you want to be precise about what you want them to do. You don't want to ask them to solve the problem for you or figure out how to solve the problem for you. So you have to think carefully about what you want them to do, when you need them to do it, and be very precise. They usually appreciate that. And if you lay it out carefully, then oftentimes there's no controversy. Say, happy to help. The thing that you have to do, though, is you don't want to appear to be out of control. So you don't want to, as I say, go to the well too often. In other words, ask them for help all the time, because then they're going to, especially if it's things that they think you should be able to handle, if it's working with some other organization, they're going to ask, well, have you already tried to work with that organization? Have you already tried to get their commitment on this? And if the answer is yes, I've tried, but there are conflicting priorities and we need your help in clearing that, then they're willing to help. But if the answer comes back, well, I haven't really tried, and they feel like you're simply pushing the problems back onto them, then they're going to start to feel like you're not doing your job and wonder whether maybe they should be getting somebody else who can run the project more effectively. So you have to be careful with this. Again, they can be powerful allies, but you don't want to overuse it. Next slide, please. So in summary, these project sponsors can be important allies, as I just said, if you know how to use them effectively. They need to be kept abreast of project status and issues. They can help secure resources if used appropriately, and they can often help you help resolve various kinds of issues. They also, it's important to keep them on your side, as I mentioned early on, to make sure that you secure funding, perhaps get additional funding or budget if you need additional resources. But you have to keep them in the loop as you go along, and they have to feel confident that you're managing the project effectively and that additional commitment of resources makes sense. So if you ask for their help, make sure that you're clear about what you need and why. Don't ask them to solve the problem for you. And don't become overly reliant on help from the project sponsor. So again, if you ask too often, they're going to, especially on things that that are either outside of their control or outside of their influence, or things that basically are within your area of influence or control, then they're going to get frustrated with that and perhaps put the project at risk accordingly. So next slide, please. So we'll have some time for Q&A here. Leanne will field the questions, so I'll turn it back over to Leanne. And if you've got any questions or comments, then please pass them on.
Thank you very much, Kurt. So yes, you can submit any questions to Kurt via the question function in the control panel. So just type that in and I'll pass that question on to Kurt. And some things to note before we start questions, we will be running a new webcast series in the new year. We're defining that at the moment. So watch your email inbox in the new year, the beginning of January, on what that webcast will be and when. And also to note, we are running an Agile Training Workshop promotion. These are workshops delivered on site at your facility. You can find out more online on the website. If you can't follow that long URL written there, just go to the home page. It's in the banner and you can find out more information, or email me and I'd be happy to send you some information on those training workshops. Any other questions regarding our consulting services, training or mentoring in your region, send me an email and I'll connect you with the appropriate person in region. And of course, we also have a lot of wealth of information online, from white papers to previous webcasts that are available for viewing and reading. So Kurt, one question I have is, what are your recommendations to deal with a negative project sponsor?
Right. This negative project sponsors sometimes come up, unfortunately. Usually what's happened in my experience is that communication with them hasn't really been effectively managed, and so, or there might be somebody who is in their chain of command who has a negative opinion on the project, and they're in a sense poisoning the project sponsor's opinion on the project. So the best things that you can do are to have clear and open communication with the sponsor as directly as possible. So if that intermediate person perhaps is coloring the opinion of the project sponsor, you need to figure out a way to work around them and go directly to the sponsor. Second thing is that nothing helps that relationship with the project sponsor better than them seeing positive results. And so if they can see the results that are coming out of each iteration, see how those map back to the desired outcomes that matter to them, then they start to feel like the project is on track. And so I think the combination of the two things, one is to eliminate people who may be poisoning the opinion of the project sponsor, and then secondly, to give more direct, have more direct access to the sponsor, showing them how things that you're doing are relating back to things that are important to them are the most important things. Sometimes what happens is that they may have a negative opinion because you're struggling with some issues on the project, and so if there are issues that they can help with, sometimes if you feel like they have a negative opinion of the project, you don't want to engage them. But actually, there's an old maxim that if you want to make a friend, ask somebody to do you a favor. So if they feel like they are helping you clear some roadblocks, then it may be difficult to get their agreement to do that, but again, they're the sponsor, it's their money, so they should be highly interested in anything that's going to be helping the project. If you enlist their help, one of the strange things that happens is that they actually feel more buy-in to the project because now they have some personal commitment to it. So asking for their help, if it's effective and yields a good result, can actually be a way to start turning around the relationship. But my guess is that if you have a negative relationship, it may be that there's somebody who's reporting to them, who's feeding them information that you want to figure out how to cut them out of the communication loop and go directly. And you may have to figure out some strategies for sidelining or neutralizing the person who's being negative, who's in their chain of command.
Thank you. Okay, next question. What are your recommendations regarding role descriptions for sponsors for ensuring clarity where you can use their influence?
Interesting. So the project sponsor, they're probably not going to respect whatever role description you come up with. It's more for the people who are on the project to understand what the role of the project sponsor is. So project sponsor is usually pretty clear. They're the one who has ultimate budget authority over the project and often has ultimate approval authority over whether the solution gets put into production. So they're pretty easy to identify. the important thing is for the project team to understand how they want to engage with the project sponsor and what they can expect out of the project sponsor and what they can't expect. And so one of the things that you could do is use this information in this presentation to help you shape some of the ways that you want to engage with the sponsor, and use that to form your understanding of what their role is.
All right, and I believe that's all the questions that we've received today, Kurt. So you must have you've covered everything well. Do you have any other thoughts you want to add? I guess and then we'll wrap up.
Just to reiterate, one of the points is that don't be afraid of the project sponsor. They're spending a lot of money on your project. Therefore, you're important to them. And although it may seem initially like they're sort of a distant person who potentially is a source of problems, that because they are spending a lot of money on the project, they immediately have a strong interest in what you're doing, and that interest might make you feel a bit uncomfortable. But ultimately, if you use them effectively, they can be your ally.
Thank you. And one note to mention to everybody, the recording of this webcast will be available tomorrow, and you'll receive an email with the link to that recording if you missed it and want to hear some of this webcast again. So thank you very much, Kurt, and that's all our questions. So we'll wrap up at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.